Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Recap. I am your host, of course, Captain B-Nard, and today we are going to be talking about the BHDL4 Week 9, all the action coming out of the final week of the regular season of the Draft League. As well, we are going to take a look at the final standings and a look into playoffs. And here to discuss all of that with me, coming on to do that is going to, of course, be the head of the BHDL himself, Scorpion. So, welcome aboard, Scorpion.
What's going on, everyone? My name is Scorpion, your current owner of the Battle Hub Draft League and coach of your Leaf Agents. Thank you so much, B-Nard, for having me. I'm very excited to be the guest on today's show. I've been absolutely loving the Captain's Recaps this season. They're great to watch, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me. I got my notes ready. And we also had some fire games this week, so I'm ready to discuss them. If ready when you are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We are ready to take it away here. A lot to discuss this week, so we will waste no time. I appreciate the kind words as well. But we will waste no time, and we are going to dive right into all the action to cover here. And so, the first game we are going to take a look at is actually going to be your game, Scorpion, as you and the Leaf Agents were taking on Silver and the Legends of Lapras. So, when you look
Yes,
at this
sir.
matchup on paper, you see on Silver's side, of course, he's got the premier Iron Valiant, the giant threat that it is. He's also got some nice defensive synergy with stuff like the Fezandipity, the Hisuian Gudra. He's got, of course, that mini Sun Core with the Walking Wake and the Torkoal. Terra Captains, Umbreon, and Ambipom are pretty solid as well. And of course, we cannot forget about the Landorus Therian. Shout out to the YouTube icon himself, a personal favorite of yours, I know, Joey Fontaine, of course. And
Had
then
to get it in there, didn't you?
Oh, we're just getting started with that. Don't even worry about it. As a matter of fact, when you watch this video back, you may notice, may or may not notice a little surprise on the thumbnail. But we don't have to talk about
Oh,
that. So,
lovely. Can't
so
wait to see it.
cool, I love it. So, of course, on your side, then of course we have the mighty Palafin at the top of the ticket there. Huge powerhouse, of course, combined with the solid defensive and offensive Pokemon such as the Zapdos and the Ting-Lu. Premier utility Pokemon, Cyclizar, of course, and then the power of the Ogerpon Cornerstone, and the Terra Captains, Delphox, and the Primeape are pretty solid. You can't forget about that Mimikyu, always an X factor with the disguise, and then the Klefki is great utility as well. So when I look at this matchup on paper, honestly, I feel like this is kind of an even game. I feel like your team is more well-rounded than Silver's team for sure. But as far as like how the threats match up into each other, I feel like obviously Palafin looks like it has a good time into this team, but he does have his answers to that. Obviously, if he were to bring the Walking Wake and the Sun strategy with the Torkoal, that seems like it would be pretty good into you. But also the Iron Valiant, if he can keep that thing away from dying to a jet punch, seems like it could do some work to your team. But obviously, Palafin is a powerhouse to deal with, and then of course stuff like the Zapdos and the Ting-Lu and the Terra Captain Delphox seem like they would be pretty good into his squad as well. But since this is your game, give me some insight into what you were thinking going into this match.
Gotcha. Yeah. So first of all, I completely agree. I thought that at least when you look at the Pokemon just side to side, I did think this was a pretty even game. I did think indeed Palafin was very strong in this matchup, one set in particular, but we'll get to that when we discuss the result. And I also thought that looking at my team specifically, I really liked my Revavroom in this matchup. It hasn't seen that much usage this season, but
Mm.
Silver actually does not have that many answers to the usual shift gear set. So I thought that was a pretty strong one in the matchup, and so yeah, I kind of also built my team around trying to like sort of get the most out of those two specifically.
Okay.
On Silver side, obviously you have two Pokemon that did really well on my season three team now turning against me with the Iron Valiant and the Fezandipity. So that's a very exciting time there.
Ironic turn of events,
I also
yes.
Yep, for sure. We also obviously have the Torkoal, which can weaken my Palafin, of course. And I did think in this matchup that Walking Wake was particularly strong into me, and I hate to admit it, but the infamous Joey Fontaine icon Landorus Therian, I was also afraid of a little bit, because the team specifically that I brought was actually quite weak to ground.
Yeah.
And but one interesting thing I actually wanted to note about this matchup is compared to like some games that I've seen, right? Also with my own game last season, I actually didn't think Iron Valiant was that good in this game
Okay.
because and it's just sort of the thing with my team personally, but when there's a Klefki there that can set up screens and threaten you with both of its stabs, when there's a River Room with Filter, which Fire Punch, the only move Valiant can hit it with, doesn't do much, and
Yeah.
also a Zapdos that can threaten to paralyze it and one-shot it with Hurricane. Like, obviously, it's still Iron Valiant. You're still going to bring it, and it's still going to be threatening. But I actually, like, of all the teams, I actually didn't think Iron Valiant was, like, my biggest concern into this game at all.
Interesting.
And yeah, I was definitely more worried about the the Walking Wig, the Lander Asterion, and another X factor in this game that I'll mention. I think was kind of threatening was the Lapras, but we'll get to that.
All right. Definitely fair points there for sure. So, when we actually take a look at the match results here, we will see that it was, in fact, you that did take the win in this one, 3-0. I thought this was a pretty good game, actually, through and through. I thought that there were a bit of hacks in this game on both sides. I think you both got a crit or two on the other one that sort of made some impact in this one, but pretty even, I think, top to bottom. I do feel like Silver made some questionable decisions in this game, both during the game and in what he prepped for this game. So, Silver is one of the coaches in this league who, and no disrespect to him because he's a strong competitor in his own right, but him and a couple of the other coaches in this league are not quite as experienced in draft league as some of the other coaches we have on deck. And I think that lack of experience does show through in certain situations. Like, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he not only did not bring the Walking Wake to this game, but he also did not bring the Landorus either.
Correct. Yeah, those are some points that I also agree with, which I think lacked his prep. And I'll have something to say about that in a minute. But yeah, both the
Yeah,
Pokemon that I was afraid of the very most,
didn't
neither of them
come.
showed up to this game. So that
Yep.
was a pretty big thing.
Yeah, so I think that was definitely a tactical error on his part. But then there were some other situations in the game where he made. I'm trying to think. There was one turn in particular where he made a switch and he just like he switched something in and just let it die. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was. I'm trying to think of I can't remember because I got so many things knocking around in my head right now with these games. But I do seem to recall there was a play where I know there was one point where he just kept wishing with Umbreon into the clef key, which like kind of made sense, but then it was like there was no game progression, and then there was one play. Another one that I remember specifically where he protected with the clef key on the Palafin that would have let you get a free bulk up or a free sub, and you got a free sub out of it, which I think was definitely a little bit of a mistake. But I feel like there was something else. Maybe I'm thinking of another game with the switch in that I was talking about, but yeah, definitely some questionable decisions on his side. Although I will say he definitely had some cool sets here, as I know you're dying to talk about in a second here. The Dragon Dance Lapras was really cool to see. Um, and then the last thing I would say is, speaking of innovative sets here, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the sticky barb backfire on your clef key here. that
Yep.
that was something that I noted from this game. But I think, as we're going to see in a couple of these other games, week 9 is usually a pretty interesting week in draft leagues because most of the players are set in their positions, either making playoffs or not making playoffs. There's typically only a few games that still really matter as far as who makes playoffs and who doesn't, which means that for the games that don't super matter, that you see, I guess, more creative or innovative Pokemon and or sets that come to those games. And I think definitely, in a couple of these games, specifically in your match, because you were already locked into playoffs, Silver was already locked out of playoffs. I
Yep.
think we definitely saw some innovative stuff, and unfortunately for you, the sticky barb clef key did not quite work as you wanted it to. But this was your game, so please tell me what happened in this one from your perspective.
Yeah, as the sticky barb Klefki. It turns out the sticky barb was a little bit too sticky. I couldn't get it. I couldn't get it off me.
Unfortunately.
But yeah, Yeah, I have to admit, in that moment specifically, I completely forgot about the dark type bypassing prankster thing. Because
Yep.
when Umbreon came in, I was like, "Oh yes, I get to trick this thing as sticky bomb. It's going to be really useful in like crippling it." And then I forgot. Second later, oh whoopsie doo, I think it's
Yeah.
a dark type. I will say, very good foresight from Silver to immediately know what I was going to do. Because for all he knows, I could have just started like setting up screens or setting up hazards. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Now, in Silva's defense as a whole, I do know that because this match result didn't matter too much and he was locked out of playoffs, he just wanted to bring some creative sets.
Hmm.
And the Ambipom in post production did actually have a pretty cool set. It was like a fully technician abusing set with protective pads and triple axle to get past the Zapdos and stuff. Trailblaze for the Palafin, as we saw. I think the switch you were talking about was specifically in the middle game when I brought a bulk up Palafin set to this game and I got it set up,
Yeah.
and he let his Torkoal
Torkoal.
pretty
It
much
was
die for
Torkoal.
free.
Yep. I
Yeah.
just you. It just
Yep.
came back to me as yeah. He just prodded in and let it die to a Palafin attack, which I'm like when he did that, I was like, well, it doesn't outspeed Palafin and it doesn't get priority and it doesn't have an aftermath and it didn't set the sun and so what is happening right now? Like I do, like
Yeah.
so I don't understand that play at all. I think and not to derail you, but I think that is something that I've seen people do in the past is when they know a Pokemon is dead to rights, essentially they just bring it in and let it die. And it's like, no, even if you think it's useless, it's never useless, right? Like you could switch it if you need a switch for fodder later, or maybe you can get it in and do something. Maybe your opponent over predicts later in the game and you do get to do something with it. So that's always a pet peeve of mine. Is like, well, the phrase pet peeve is also a pet peeve of mine, but um, ironically, but also when people just send their Pokemon in to die for no reason is definitely a big one for me. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He could have definitely kept the Torkoal around as a sack. Another interesting thing to note in this game is that the Torkoal was not Drought. That's another elephant in the room in this one. I think it was White Smoke, but I don't remember too clearly.
Yeah.
The reason he did that was because he didn't have any sun abusing Mons, and I did bring a Choice Specs Delphox to this game to try and turn the sun against him.
Hmm.
So that was a pretty interesting decision there. But I think in Silver's defense, it mostly just came down to in the moment he was kind of panicking against the bulk up Palafin. He didn't know too well what to do. And he really kind of like, because at that point in his defense, right, I had Stealth Rock and 3 layers of spikes up. I had maximum hazards up.
Yeah.
So he was kind of just desperate to get them off the field. And Torkoal was boots. So,
Yeah.
he was kind of just desperate. But yeah, of course, in that situation, it had no way to survive the Palavin's Jet Punch there again, especially without the sun.
Yeah, the hazards really played a big role toward the mid to the end of the game when you had all those stacked up on them. Absolutely.
Yep. So there was, of course, like you said, a little bit of hacks. There was a middle point in the game, especially when Palafin was set up, and I got a crit Drain Punch on him, which allowed me to two-shot it with Drain Punch rather than three-shot it. But then, right, I was about to go in for the kill. He crit me back, so that was a bit of an interesting one. I think if that hadn't happened, then Palafin could have actually ended the game right there and then. But in his defense, I obviously also crit him first, so I think it's only an eye for an eye, and I didn't mind it too much. But that was definitely a big turning point. I think otherwise Palafin could have honestly swept the game and ended it there. Um, and yeah, another thing in this game, a pretty big takeaway for me is I actually think this matchup would have been a very different story if Silver's Lapras still had the ability to Terra. Because I didn't prep for it too well. And now, again, granted, if it was a Terra Captain, I would have definitely prepped for it better. But Lapras' stab combination with Earthquake actually hits my team really, really hard. And so when that thing started Dragon Dancing, I knew I could have potentially been in trouble.
Yeah.
Because it also gets Water Absorb, right? So it can block Palafin's Jet Punch, and it was Water Absorb. So I'm very, very lucky that Palafin was still able to take an Icicle Spear from it and then take it out.
Yeah.
Or sorry, an Earthquake, I mean. But if the Lapras, for example, was still Terra Electric with Terra Blast, then it could have been a very different game. But it's a very cool
Yeah.
set to see still, and I feel, I do respect Silver's effort to bring some cool sets to this game, and we had a good time. It was only a 3-0 victory as well, not exactly a sweep. So yeah, I think it was a solid game overall, but yeah, I feel like definitely some factors made it quite interesting for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely fair points as well. So, But yeah, moving on from this one, that is going to bring us to the matchup of Anastasia and Team Aquamarine taking on Lazy Boy and the Sleepy Laxingtons. So I don't want to spend too much time on this game because it actually didn't happen, as we'll get to in a second. But I do want to just kind of look at what the matchup could have been on paper, as we see on Anna's side, of course, the reigning. Pokemon Scarleton slash BHDL champion had put together quite the interesting team, very reminiscent in some ways of the um, team that she had last season, with, of course, the Dragon Fairy Steel Core with the Dragapult, Primarina, and Corviknight, very strong. Ogerpon Hearthflame, very powerful as well. And then, of course, the Incineroar is great utility, and the Galarian Articuno and Bellibolt as Terra Captains are, of course, something to watch out for. Compare that on Lazy Boy's side, of course, to he's got the Darkrai, the Quackleval, the Pecharunt, Jirachi, all really solid stuff. Ursaluna Blood Moon, which is an absolute threat no matter who you are. Definitely don't sleep on that thing. Um, and then, of course, he's got those Terra Captains, Pyroar, and Mousehold could put in some work. So when I look at this matchup on paper, I do feel like it does seem like it's a pretty solid, solidly, I should say, in Anna's favor. I think Dragapult seems like it has a pretty good time here because it could pretty much just outspeed everything and do massive damage to just about everything on Lazy Boy's team. I feel like the Anna's team seems to be more well-rounded than Lazy Boy's team as well. So I do feel like Anna probably has the matchup on paper here. I don't really think Quackleval, which would is one of Lazy Boy's premier Pokemon, really does too much into Anna's team. So yeah, I definitely think Anna would have had the edge in this one on paper. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely Lazy Boy does have some pretty big threats. Obviously, I do think a Darkrai, is a pretty powerful weapon to have against Dragapult, but you do still get outsped by it, so that's a pretty big thing there. And Anna has a lot of switches to Darkrai, right? She has a Primarina, which especially with a poison resist berry can easily take the thing's hits, an Incineroar, a Belly Bolt. So Darkrai, already Lazy Boy's biggest threat, is hard to kind of work around. I also thought that Corviknight in particular had a really strong matchup into Lazy's team because if you look at the team right there, Quackleval, it does resist both of Ursaluna's stabs as well, rare commodity. It can
Yes.
wall Screamtail to an extent. It can take Noivern and Flamethrowers decently well, and it obviously walls the ever living crap out of Mousehole too. So
Yes,
Corviknight, I think,
absolutely.
would have been an immortal wall for Lazy to get rid of. I wish him the best of luck there.
Yes, I agree.
Now, I did want to mention one thing about I think was pretty interesting about this game, and that's that I think low key, if Lazy Boy was ever planning on bringing Flapple to a game, this could have been the one because I think a Terrafire Flapple with the ability to resist Ogerpon stabs and hit Corviknight super effectively, as well as dodge Will-O-Wisps, I think it could have potentially done something if Lazy Boy managed to set it up. But it was still, obviously, at the end of the day, it's still a Flapple. But I
Yes,
was looking at some of his games. I was like, okay, if you ever want to try and make Flapple work, this could be the game. But
fair point.
yeah, I agree with your. I do agree with your points. I think this matchup is definitely Anna's favor. It just seems like her premier threats match up better against his. And
Yes.
yeah, like I said, I genuinely think Corviknight alone is a huge problem for Lazy's team.
Yes, absolutely agreed with that 100%. So, but as I mentioned, this game actually did not happen because it was Anastasia that actually took a 3-0 victory via forfeit. Lazy, this was not any huge shock because Lazy Boy had decided a couple of weeks ago, since he was mathematically, or I guess technically at that point, he wasn't mathematically locked out of playoffs, but he had decided that it was such a long shot for him to make playoffs at that point that he just didn't want to continue. And while that is kind of disappointing, obviously, I do understand it. I get it. And, it is what it is. Every coach obviously has that decision that they have to make toward the end of every season. And sometimes they decide that, hey, I want to just stick with it, play my games out, have some fun, even if I'm locked out of playoffs. Other times they just decide it's not worth it and decide not to. But yeah, it is what it is there. So.
Yep.
But yeah, moving along from that one, that is actually going to go ahead and bring us to my game as everybody's favorite underdog team, the Philadelphia Pidgeys, and myself go into battle against Viridoo, also known as Biridoo from the Discord server. Of course, we have to say go ahead and join the Discord server. It's the best place to go for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Wi-Fi battles right now. There is a link in the description down below, just so you're aware. But I do want to ask you right off the cuff: do you or do you not know if there are still only 36% of people watching this video that are subscribed? That's what I need to know.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And if I have to be, if I have to do a little bit of analyzing there, I have to say my conclusion is that that fact is indeed a bit bizarre. I hope you agree.
Very, very true, very true. So I did know, I did also hear YouTube tries to unsubscribe people sometimes too. I wasn't sure if that was true either. Can you confirm or deny that?
Yeah, according to my very very reliable sources, such as everyone's British underdog YouTuber Just Weavile, that is in fact true. Don't fact check it. We're gonna take it 100% reliable. So yes, it
Yes.
does happen. Please double check and make sure you're subscribed.
Just double check. Yes, no fact check needed. So, all right. So,
Facts.
but having said that,
Gotta get
yeah,
it in there.
it has to be. It has to be. There's no choice at this point. I mean, I think that was, to derail ourselves here a bit. I think there's no better example than Biridoo. If you're going to do the Just Weavile intro and the joke, then there's no better example than Biridoo.
Of course.
But yeah, so back to the matchup here. Actually, of course, on yes,
Comedy moment
the less
over.
important thing to talk about the matchup. Yes, on my side, of course, you can see the what people have come to call, of course, the mirror dimension version of the Philadelphia Pidgeys from season 3. Of course, the Sneasler this time comboed with the Indeedee male for that potential unburden combo. Very powerful. Then, of course, Terra Captains, Gudra, and Mudsdale, I believe, very strong as well, coupled with the larger defensive core of the Scissor and the Rotom Wash, obviously very familiar from last season for me. And then, of course, we've got stuff like the Grimmsnarl for some great utility, and then we have the power and speed of the Hisuian Arcanine and the Azelf. Match that up against Biridoo's team. Of course, he's got the Iron Treads, very powerful and premier spinner. He's got the Chi Yu, which is, of course, Chi Yu, no explanation needed. Then we have the Ogre Pond Wellspring, the Salamence, just very threatening stuff. The Azumarill as well. Tarot Captain's Kilowattrel and Muck are very strong too. And of course, the Uxie provides just an endless amount of utility. So, um, when I look at this matchup on paper, again, I feel like this is a pretty even match on paper, honestly. I feel like, obviously, with a few exceptions, Sneasler looks like it could almost have a really good time in this match, but then Salamence could be a problem for it. Defensive Muck could be a problem for it. Even potentially Terra Ghost Ampharos, if he wanted to bring that, could possibly do something. Then, of course, on his side, Chi Yu could be pretty strong, but then obviously, especially defensive Gudra could shut it down. And then, obviously, on my side, certain stuff like the Scissor just didn't seem like it had a very good time into his team. On his side, in my opinion, some other stuff didn't seem like it had a great time into my team. Like, for example, the priority moves getting shut down by the Indeedee. So all in all, I think this is a pretty even game on paper. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think definitely the matchup does look quite balanced on both sides. Both of you have very solid offense, of course, very solid defense, of course. I did think that on your side, I thought that Rotom Wash was actually a pretty key player in this game because it actually does really well into like the first batch of mons that Beardo has, and if it also looks like his team. Like a Will-O-Wisp as a move just seems pretty free to click against his mons. We'll get to that in a minute because there's some
Yeah.
fun
Well,
stuff to be said about that.
I was gonna say,
But
yeah, that
um, I,
you're,
I,
yeah, yeah.
but basically, like even before looking at the matchup, I thought Rotom Wash was a very solid pivot into this game again because his two electric immunities do not appreciate taking a Hydro Pump to the face,
Yep.
and the few things that can take Rotom Stab somewhat comfortably don't appreciate a Will-O-Wisp in the slightest.
Yes.
I also thought that on your side, Hisuian Arcanine was quite a strong player, and I have to say I was surprised to not see that thing in Team Brief. Not to question your prep, because I think you prepped and played really well in this game, but Just from my like what I thought of the matchup beforehand,
Yeah.
I really thought Hisui and Arcanine was really strong in this one. But I guess I'll let you talk about that in a minute.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then uh, and then on Beardoo's side, obviously, I thought Yuxi was a very, very big player in this game. It seemed really well. It seemed to do really well into like just as a blanket check to a lot of mons like Sneasler, Mudsdale, Indeedee to an extent, especially if you don't have coverage for it.
Yeah.
Obviously, you get to knock off the kind of force progress and knock off leftovers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think let's see, what else did I have to do? Oh yeah, and I also thought on Beardoo's side that the Scarf Kilowattrel also looked really good. I think that's another set that you were also expecting going into this game.
Yep. Yeah,
And so yeah, I
so
thought that had some good potential as well because it really outspeeds Sneasler. Because I know you love your Scarf Sneasler, and that would be a way to one of the few ways to actually outspeed the Sneasler. So
yeah,
that's
so
always a thing you've got to keep in mind.
yep. So definitely two things I do want to say before we talk about what actually happened in the game is yes, I do agree with you. I was definitely expecting a Scarf Kilowattrel because it does outspeed my entire team except for Unburdened Sneasler if I chose to bring that. So I was definitely banging on that. The other thing, when you come back to the Hisuian Arcanine, I was very, very tempted to bring Hisuian Arcanine to this game. Very tempted, and the main reason that I ended up not bringing it was probably because of Azumarill. That was one of the biggest reasons because I figure like it doesn't matter how good Arcanine is into the rest of his team, but there's just no way that it lives in Aquajet from Azumarill. So it's like I that was one of the big concerns of mine with Hisuian Arcanine. The other one was fitting it onto the team because I thought for sure we would see the Azumarill, which we'll get to in a second. Um, but yeah, so that was a big concern of mine. But the other thing was that I really wanted to find a way to get Mudsdale on the team, and I didn't feel like I could bring Mudsdale and Hisuian Arcanine together just for the fact that he has very strong water types on his team with the Ogerpon
Gotcha. That makes a lot of
Wellspring.
sense.
Yep, and so basically I was in a position where I had to choose between Mudsdale and Hisuian Arcanine, and I was like, well, Mudsdale can be a Terra Captain. Mudsdale is kind of better against the Muck, which I was kind of anticipating a defensive Muck to try and deal with Sneasler. So I was, and I was also expecting a Terra Flying Muck as well, which it didn't. He didn't Terra it, so I'm not sure if it was or not. But
It was Terra Dark.
was it Terra Dark? Okay, that's interesting. So,
Yep.
so yeah, so that was kind of my logic behind Arcanine. The biggest, I'd say the biggest reason why I didn't bring it was just because in my mind, I had to choose between that and Mudsdale, and I just felt like Mudsdale was better. So,
Yeah,
um,
no, completely. I could completely get that. Like I said, I don't question your prep this week at all. I think that the six you brought made complete sense. It was just like I just wanted to like sort of hear the thought process
oh
behind
yeah,
like
absolutely,
which mon would have taken Arcanine which mon would have
taking the
taken
spot.
Arcanine's place, basically.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely. So when we look at the actual match result here, we will see that it was in fact Beardoo that did get the win in this game, 1-0. Very close, very competitive, very tight game through and through. Since it was my game, I'll kind of tell you about it from my
yep.
perspective.
Go ahead.
So early on in the game, I kind of what I wanted to do in the beginning of the game was bait out whether or not the Kilowattrel was going to be Scarf, and I was pretty positive it was going to be Scarf, but I wasn't 100% sure. So when that was one of the reasons that I brought Fake Out Sneasler was because I wanted to feel out whether or not the Kilowattrel was Scarf or not. So when I had that turn one and I faked out the Kilowattrel and he stayed in on the fake out, I was pretty confident it was Scarf at that point. From what he did, from the fact that he made that play. Having said that, obviously when we go further into the game, the early game I felt like was kind of there were some pretty important hacks against me. One in particular that kind of set the game down, a little bit of a rough path for me early on. The biggest of which, as you kind of alluded to before, was of course the Will-O-Wisp miss, where he switched his Ogerpon Wellspring into my Rotom into an incoming Will-O-Wisp, but of course I actually missed the Will-O-Wisp, which I was quite bitter about because that was obviously a huge, as it would turn into later in the game, a huge moment in retrospect, as Ogerpon ended up doing a lot of work to my team and couldn't nearly have done that had it been burned. But yeah, that was definitely rough for me. And then toward the middle of the game, I felt like I had a pretty good strategy. Despite the fact that he had rocks up, I was able to pivot chip him pretty well with Sneasler and Rotom. Which is kind of what I was obviously hoping for, because Sneasler doesn't take too much damage from Stealth Rock because it resists it, and Rotom could heal with leftovers. Um, so that worked out pretty well for me. There was a moment in the game where I kind of went for broke, and this kind of comes into what I had talked about earlier with bringing perhaps a little more creative sets that you wouldn't otherwise bring, because going into this matchup, Beardo and I were both not only locked into playoffs, but also both locked in the top four. So we were really just fighting to see which of us would get to choose our opponent in the quarterfinals and which of us wouldn't. And while that's something that I think I would have wanted at the same time, well, I'll talk about my thoughts, my feelings about that later. So, um, what I wanted to do, what I really wanted to do in this game more than anything, just to see if I could make it happen, was to try and get a Drifblim sweep. that was what
Of
my
course.
that yeah, of course, because what's up, people? Eat your boy Joey, obviously. So, another shout out. That's our
I
second
have
one.
to say, honestly, like in this game, uh, like first of all, getting Yuxi try and bait it into a weak knockoff and then be off the races. Obviously, I don't think that. Like, I genuinely think in this game you did the best you could. I think the
Yeah.
way you set it up was the way to do it, and unfortunately, Beardo just didn't fall for the bait. But I think that was the best way you could have done it, and it's a
Yeah.
shame it didn't work out. But I respect the effort.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so it was twofold. So the reason it didn't work was twofold. One, because unfortunately, like you said, he didn't take the bait with Yuxi. I was really hoping. So I had a moment, obviously, where I pivoted into the Driftbloom on the Yuxi, and I was thinking, okay, I already knew he had knockoff, right? So I'm thinking, okay, he has knockoff, U-turn, stealth rock, whatever. He could knock off here. I mean, that would be like to get rid of my item, depending on he didn't know what Driftbloom I was obviously at that point. Um, so I figured, okay, if he knocks off here, I take basically no damage from that. I was of course unburdened weakness policy drift bloom, so I was like, okay, if he
I do
knocks
love
off
the
here,
set.
I could actually sweep him if he goes knock off here, because I have, and I probably couldn't have in the long run, in retrospect, but I could have done massive damage at least, or who knows, because my plan was he goes knockoff, right? It triggers the weakness policy, doubles my speed, gives me the weakness policy boost. I calm mind as well, so then I'm at +3 special attack, +1 special defense. At that point, I can strength sap to get back up to full health for the most part, and I EV'd the Driftbloom so that it outspeeds everything on his team except for Scarf Kilowattrel, because there was no way that Drifbloom could outspeed Scarf Kilowattrel. So I EV'd it that it would outspeed everything else, including Booster Energy, Iron Treads, which he actually didn't end up bringing, nor did he bring the Azumarill that I was worried about. Um, which kind of also, as I want to tangent for a second here, this kind of also feeds into my point of that a lot of times coaches bring alternative stuff when they're in situations like this, which is what Beardo is kind of infamous for in his like usually week 8, week 9 games, is he brings stuff that he probably wouldn't be his first choice to bring to games, just because he doesn't want to tip his hand, so to speak, going into playoffs, which I understand that. Um, but yeah, so back to the Driftbloom thing. It was really just a situation of what I wanted to do is I wanted to have Driftbloom in +3 special attack from weakness policy and a calm mind, +1 special defense, unburdened, and then I feel like if I was at full or close to full health at +1 special defense, there's no way that Kilowattrel one shots me. Um, Unless it was Specs, which obviously he wasn't, and even then, I feel like Specs probably does one shot me, but I think non Specs Thunderbolt does not one shot me, so it
Yeah.
definitely does not one shot me at +1 special defense. So had he actually had fallen for that weakness policy on the Driftbloom, I actually could have swept him there and got the epic Driftbloom sweep, which was like, I'll be completely honest with you, when I was building this team, the first thing that I thought of was it's week 9. I'm already locked in the top four. I just want to see if I can make this work. Like that was my
That's
that
strong,
was
yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to see if I can make this work. And
You had a
unfortunately,
mission and you went for it. I do respect it.
yes, and unfortunately it didn't, because he didn't take the bait, and then he pivots into he pivots into Chi Yu. Now at +1 special defense, I actually can take an attack from one attack from Chi Yu.
I
Unfortunately,
hate to
he
be the guy, but no, you cannot.
yes, I can. What
I
do you
actually
mean?
wait.
He
I
said
actually did go back
me
and
too.
calc it, and that overheat, even without the critical hit, is a guaranteed one-hit KO at Driftblim where I was at. I
Even
hate to
at
be
plus
burst your
one,
bubble.
really? Huh.
Yes, yes, you were at
I I guess I
you were
don't
I think you
trust
were at
Beardu's
free
calc.
four. You were at free 14 HP. I calculated it with a +1. You were at free 14 points of HP. That overheat from him does a minimum of free 16 points of HP. It is a guaranteed one-hit KO,
All right.
even without the crit.
Well, I suppose I shouldn't trust Beardu's calcs because he said that it would do 70 to 80%, and I was like, well,
Yeah, so I
I was
made sure
above
to
that.
double check for you because I totally get where you're coming from.
That's
But
fine.
yeah, the crit
So
did not matter, and Dark Pulse would have mattered even less. But he chose
yeah,
to pick
so
overheat.
yeah, so I guess bottom line was it wasn't going to work out either way, but yeah, it kind of is what it is. Like I said, my plan was I went for it, and it didn't work out. But then I think I'm okay with all that. Like that is what it is. I have no problem with any of that. When we get toward the end of the game, though, the one thing that I find, the thing that did disappoint me about this game, not getting the Drift Bloom set to work was a little bit of a disappointment, but I'm okay with that because it was an unlikely scenario, right? The one thing that did disappoint me is so we get toward the end of the game and we're down to a situation where I've got Rotom and Sneasler left. He's got Kilowattrel and Ogerpon Wellspring left. So unfortunately, the one thing that I did that I kicked myself for is so he has the Kilowattrel in. I'm like 99% sure he's choice at this point, and so I have a decision to make. I can either excuse me. I could either go for the electric attack on the Kilowattrel, which I'm 99% sure is Volt Absorb, or I could go for the water attack, which Ogerpon Wellspring has water absorb. So it's like it's kind of a
Yeah, deadly
50-50.
50-50 there.
Yeah, and so what I do, rather than taking a 50-50 shot, is I actually make the one play that ensures that I lose, which is going for Hex instead. So I am very disappointed in myself for making that play. I feel like I should have known he was going to switch. The reason I didn't go for Volt Switch in that moment is because I thought that there was a decent chance he would stay in and try to chip me with Hurricane. Because I feel like it would have chipped me down and maybe been like a 2 or 3 shot from that point. So I felt like there was kind of a chance he might, depending on what the spreads were. Rotom was HP invested, but it was also chipped. Um, so that was kind of the logic behind that play. But it was the worst possible play I could have made because I should have just gone for either Hydro or Volt Switch. It should have been Volt Switch, and I was even telling myself it should have been Volt Switch, and then at the last split second decided not to do it. So I'm very disappointed that the game came down to that prediction because had I gone Volt Switch instead of Hex, I think I win the game 100% of the time there because I don't think Ogerpon survives the Volt Switch, and even if it does, it gets taken out by Sneasler, and then it's down to Kilowattrel, which actually, looking back on what set he had on Kilowattrel, couldn't really do anything to Rotom. And then I do have also Fake Out on Sneasler, which can definitely two-shot from there. So yeah, I do think I threw the game. The game was mine. Despite all this stuff that we had talked about, the game was in my hands, and I felt like I threw it away at the end. So I am disappointed in that. Um, but yeah, I thought it was a really solid game through and through as well. Very tight, very close. But yeah, that's I've talked long enough about it. So please give me your thoughts on that.
So yeah, so the 50-50 turn there at the end was definitely very very interesting. I actually like while I was watching the game, I actually like straight up paused the game and sort of analyzed the situation you guys were in because I thought it was really really interesting.
Yeah,
To be honest, I don't like again, I really at that point I realized kind of sort of you had to take that 50-50 and it really is a 50-50 because in Biridu's situation there's also like sort of no optimal way to play that. If he predicts Volt Switch, he stays in. If he predicts Hydro Pump, he switches out. So it truly was like depending on what the other person was thinking, which is obviously a very tough call to make. But like you said, you really just in that situation you had to really go for the 50-50 because if you do get it right, you likely win the game. And I get obviously I totally get let's just say I'm also no stranger to throwing games to questionable decisions this season. That happened a couple of weeks
true,
ago,
true,
and
true.
I think you might recognize what I'm talking about.
Indeed, indeed.
But enough about that. So. I will say, earlier in that situation, the Kilowattrol was actually Terra flying, and it obviously went for a Hurricane on Rotom, which it did miss. Now, I don't think
Yes.
even with the Terra, that Hurricane was a two shot from there, so I don't think it mattered too much.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a thing that made the situation more dodgy for Beardo as well, because otherwise in that situation he can be more comfortable staying in with Kilowattrol because he knows that even if you do predict him and go Hydro Pump, Rotom is sufficiently chipped. But
Right.
that is definitely it was still a very like you were both obviously walking on eggshells trying to suss out what the other person was thinking.
Of course.
I will not deny, although I really don't like to talk about hacks, the Will-O-Wisp miss on Ogerpon was absolutely huge, and I have to say, just like Beardo, I am also accustomed to switching in my biggest threat on a Will-O-Wisp and getting away with a miss. Sorry, Emerald, but
Yeah.
yeah, Ogerpon definitely looked very strong into your team in general. Obviously, the combination of its stats plus play rough hit a lot of your mons super effectively,
Yep.
and it ended
Ended
up
up.
getting 4 KOs this game.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that
Yep.
was definitely big.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, to quote a great Pokemon player, if it's not 100% accurate, it's trash, and she was absolutely right. So
Yeah,
that's all I
no,
can say.
completely.
So
It just seems to be a thing with this season in general, missing Will-O-Wisps, because I feel like almost half the coaches have missed crucial Will-O-Wisps this season. So
the funny thing is, like, it's not typically something I do, but then to your point, what you said earlier, I a lot of time I don't run stuff like that, but I was like, it just looks so good into his team because I had the same thought process that you did. It's like, oh, the water electric stab is really good, and then for what it's not good for, I can but like either Salamence or Ogerpon can get burned with a Will-O-Wisp, but I didn't
yeah,
count on missing the Will-O-Wisp. As another old school PokeTuber used to say, you have to predict the hacks, and I didn't. So,
yeah, literally.
um,
So yeah, I thought this was a very solid game. I think both of you played really well, prepped really well. And I will say another funny little takeaway that I had in this game is I'm gonna be honest, I did not know that Sneasler had another signature move in Dire Claw because watching this game, you could convince me that Sneasler's signature move is U-turn. Holy crap, that thing was U-turning all over the place. And I think that was well played from you. You put it in a position where Beardo was like put in like lose situations where he either takes a lot of damage on one of his mons or you get the pivot. And obviously, every time you do that
yep,
on a lot of his mons, you get the chance for poison touch as well.
yep,
But Sneasler must have been feeling dizzy after this game because it just kept U-turning round and round, and that was
yes,
I just thought that was hilarious. But
yes. That muck must
it
have taken
definitely
like,
was part of your game plan, I feel, and it worked out. But
yeah, that
yeah,
muck
that's just a funny little thing
that muck must have
that
taken
I
like
noticed this game.
4 or 5 U-turns, I want to say, something like that. So, yeah, so
Yeah,
that was definitely my. I felt once the muck was down, I was obviously comfortable doing other things, but with the muck around, it's like I can't click close combat, I can't click dire claw because it resists both of them. It's max bulk
of
investment,
course,
I'm
yeah. And the
sure.
Muck
So
was even covered cloak, so it couldn't get Dire Claw status.
yes, so but yeah, so definitely fair points. But at the end of the day, like I said, it is what it is, and I'm happy that you know I'm hoping that the misses and stuff like that are over now. That's all my hope. But
Yeah,
um,
playoffs going to be a wholly different thing. Trust.
yes. So, but yeah, moving on from that one, that is going to bring us over to the matchup of Stefan and the Grand Lake Garchomps taking on Raymond and the Mamoswine Doubters. So, on Stefan's side, obviously he's got some big powerhouses such as the mascot, of course, the Garchomp. He's got the Hisuian Samurats. Of course, the Rillaboom and Hawlucha Unburdened combo there. The Unaware Skeledirge could, of course, be very important. Then, of course, he's got the Terra Captains, Diancie, and the Bastiodon. Could potentially put some work in, specifically the Diancie, and then the Munkidori is a powerhouse as well. Match that up against Ray, obviously. He's got the Latios, the Ogerpon, the Terrapagos. Very powerful stuff there. He's got the Tinkaton is great utility. The Mamoswine is great power and utility. As well, the Tornadus Therian is nice utility. And then those Terra Captains, Lantern, and Blaziken are powerhouses as well. So looking at this matchup on paper, I feel like I don't know. Once again, I kind of sort of feel like this is an even match. I do feel like Ray's team is a little more well-rounded than Stefan's team is, all in all. But I do feel like that, matchup versus matchup, I feel like it's actually pretty close. I feel like Garchomp seems like it has a pretty good time into Ray's team, aside from the Mamoswine, obviously, or potentially like a Terra on the Lantern could perhaps put a stop to it. But other than that, I feel like Garchomp has a pretty good time into Ray's team. Um, Hisuian Samurott looks like it could be pretty solid in the Rays team as well. Terra Diancie is always a problem. But yeah, on Ray's side, obviously, Latios could potentially put in work depending on what set it is. And then obviously the Terra Lantern, Terra Blaziken could be a problem. But what did you think about this matchup on paper?
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting game. If I'm being honest, I think I actually give the slight edge in this matchup to Raymond. And the reason why I say that is because I think both these players do have Pokemon that are strong into each other. We did see that despite the fact that both players brought pretty balanced teams, the game did still move at quite a fast pace. And I do definitely agree with you. Garchomp is a very big player in this game. Raymond has no, true switch-ins to the combination of Dragon and Ground. And I also thought that the Diancie, which Stefan has been doing really well with this season, actually, it's near the top of the kill standings despite his, less than ideal record in the league here. He's been doing really well with that Diancie. But on Raymond's side, I thought Latios was a very, very, very big problem for Stefan's side. It clicks its stab really, really freely here. Tornado Styrian, I think, was a very big problem for Stefan because it walls certain mons in his team completely, especially Rillaboom, and it also outspeeds all of them, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But then I also thought that a very big X factor in this game, which we'll get to when we talk about the actual match, was the Lantern. The Lantern put in a lot of work this game. And I was watching, obviously I prep with Raymond, so I kind of sort of know, how he thinks usually. And I was looking at this Lantern set he was about to bring into the match. Like, this thing is going to be a problem for Stefan. And yeah, spoiler alert, it was. But the set that he brought specifically, I think, was really, really unique. Well, not really too unique, but it looked really, really strong. And like for a mon that's only 6 points, I thought it actually had a very big role to play in this game.
All right. Yep. Definitely fair points. So, when we take a look at the actual match results here, we will see that it was in fact Raymond that did take the win in this match. Pretty sizable 4-0 victory in his favor. Despite that, I did think that this was actually a pretty good game, pretty solid game. I thought in the early goings of this game, Stefan was really kind of in the driver's seat with the Garchomp early on in this match. Um,
Yeah, he went off right to the races with that thing with the scale shot mixed flamethrower.
Yeah, the mixed Garchomp really had Ray on the back foot early, and I think I want to say if Stefan had kind of made a few better predictions around the Garchomp around what Ray was switching in and out of the Garchomp when he was trying to scout its set, I feel like Stefan could have done better or perhaps even won this game because that, like you said, there are really no switch-ins on Ray's team to the Garchomp, and especially with that +1 speed that he got off with the scale shot early. Yeah, Garchomp was putting in a lot of work early game. But I do that kind of feeds me to my next point, which is I want to say I do feel like Ray played this match better than Stefan. I think they both had really good prep, but I feel like Ray played the matchup a little bit better than Stefan. He played around that Garchomp, like knowing full well that that Garchomp did so much work to his team. Ray played it very well as he normally does. Um, and unfortunately for Stefan, one of the big missteps I think in his situation is he ends up a couple turns after the Garchomp was really chipping Ray's team severely. He finds himself switching in the Garchomp in directly into the Lantern and switched it right into an Ice Beam, and it died, which was definitely a huge mistake on his side, I think, because even if the Garchomp had to switch out and come back in without the speed boost, I feel like it still could have, put work in, obviously, potentially if it could have got the speed boost back too. So, from scale shot. So I definitely think that was a big tactical error on Stefan's side. But pretty solid game all in all. I definitely think, to your point, the Diancie did do work in this matchup, but also on Stefan's side. But then on Ray's side, the Tornadus Therian put in a lot of work, and the Lantern, I think it was Terra Fairy Lantern, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
put in a
correct.
lot of work. Yep. that put in a lot of work in this match as well. And then like I said, toward the mid to the late game, especially Ray just took charge with those Pokemon and was able to close it out. But what did you think of the matchup?
Yeah, so we obviously, like you said, in those early turns, we really saw an interesting dynamic with mixed Garchomp having Ray on the back foot. I will say the way Raymond kind of went about going, trying to counter it was definitely, I think, the way to do it. He really just tried to like get Stefan to overcommit to clicking one move and then sort of dancing around it, trying to get something in position that could revenge kill it. And eventually the threat was neutralized, but it definitely did put Stefan ahead early. There was a pretty big moment in this game where the Hisuian Samurott was in against Tornadus Therian, and it was choice scarfed, and it missed a ceaseless edge. And that
That
chip
was
with
yeah.
with Tornadus Therian having Regenerator, that you really need any chip you can get on a thing. And again, with how strong Tornadus was in this matchup, that definitely did play a bit of a role there, especially because missing a ceaseless edge also means you miss out on a layer of spikes.
Yep, that was a big moment for sure. That big negative moment for Stefan for sure.
Yep. However, there was also, I will say, there was also quite a bit of hacks on Raymond's side. I do believe he missed a Draco Meteor with Latios on Rillaboom, and that was a guaranteed KO because it had Soul Dew. And there was also Stefan also went hard Halucha on Raymond's Tinkaton at some point. And Raymond went for the play rough, but that also missed. Now,
Yeah.
that one was slightly less important because the Halucha couldn't touch Tinkaton anyway. But it definitely could have mattered more in certain situations. There was actually a very interesting point in this game where the Lantern had just dealt with the Garchomp, like you said, with the Ice Beam. Then Skeledirge came in. And I will say, like we said, Lantern was a very big MVP in this game because it actually managed to deal with this weakness policy flame charge Skeledirge. It was a really cool set from Stefan, by the way.
Yes, it was.
But unfortunately, it was not able to break past Lantern, even a +2. However, once Lantern activated the weakness policy, Stefan went for a Torch Song, and that did about, I think, 60% to Lantern or something, and then it went down to another Scald. But Stefan actually had Blast Burn on deck, and that would have smoked the Lantern from where it was at. Now, granted, it would have had to recharge after that, and Mamoswine was still around and would have just come in and got the revenge kill. But if he wanted the Lantern to go down early, or at least in that situation, he could have gone for the Blast Burn, and that would have been a really, really sick tech that I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see. But
That would have been a pretty epic
that was
moment.
definitely
Yes,
yeah, for sure.
absolutely.
Like I said, speaking of weakness policies, this one actually did work
Work.
out, but not still couldn't get
He was able
quite
to
past the
he was at least able to pop his weakness policy, so he made it farther than I did.
exactly.
But he it didn't end up ultimately mattering, unfortunately. But he did get farther than I did, absolutely.
Yep. And then so yeah, that was a definitely epic moment. And then I have to say, I'm a little bit surprised that Stefan's Halucha was Mold Breaker in this matchup and not Unburdened because he did bring the Rillaboom. So I was like, okay, he's surely going to go for an Unburdened sweep. Now, if I had to take a wild guess, it's probably to try and bypass Terrapagos' Terra Shell and kill it in one hit with a close combat. That would be my estimated guess
Yeah.
because it did look like an offensive Halucha. But I was a little bit surprised when Halucha came in on the grassy terrain, and we saw a Mold Breaker come out instead of the grassy seed.
As
But
as someone
I'm
who
sure there was a
yeah, that was a big shocking moment to someone, especially who used that Halucha Unburdened set in season one here in the BHDL to great effect. It was I was like, wait, where's the grassy seed? Like, what's happening right now?
yeah,
So, um, but yeah,
yeah, but
definitely
yeah.
fair enough.
I think it was a solid game though. I really liked Stefan's tech. Like I said, Stefan was already out of playoffs at that point, but he still decided to go out with a bang, which I very much respect. And yeah, like I said, Raymond, I really like the way he's been using Lantern this season, and this game was another great showcase of that. So solid game.
Yep, definitely, definitely. So, but yeah, so moving on from that one, that is going to bring us to the game of the notorious HIM, or as some might say, the notorious HYM, and his
Yep, I'm notorious for saying that.
yes, yes, you are, and his Brooklyn Vax Calibers taking on the team of Rolder and the Down Under Crocodiles. So, this was one of two games that was extremely important as far as playoffs go this week. As if HIM were to win this game, he would lock into playoffs actually, but a loss would mean that he would definitely not be in a good spot to make playoffs. Not that it was impossible, but um, his fate would be out of his hands at that point. So, but yeah,
Yep.
obviously on HIM side, he's got that premier Baxcalibur Galarian Slowking combo with the the chili reception, all that good stuff. Of course, he's got the Excadrill, very powerful, very utility based as well, and the Terra Captains Typhlosion and Mismagius are very strong. Of course, the Thunderous Therian is obviously a powerhouse. The Quagsire is a big defensive and utility powerhouse as well. Taking on Rolder, of course, who's got that rain strategy on his team. He's got the Raging Bolt, the Pelipper, the Manaphy, the Basculegion male, and the Overquill, all part of that Rain Core. He's also got the Overquill as one of his Terra Captains alongside Hitmonchan, and then, of course, the Rotom Mow and the Clodsire are pretty strong as well. Rabombi is great utility. So looking at this matchup on paper, I do kind of feel like Rolder actually has the edge on paper in this matchup because it seems like the Rain Core actually does look relatively good into HIM's team. Aside from like I don't know Baxcalibur, but even then, like it does resist water, but it doesn't appreciate boosted attacks from Basculegion or Overquill all the same. But yeah, the Raincore looks really good against the Excadrill, against the Garganackle, against the Typhlosion, unless he's Terra Grass. But even then, you got those perfect accuracy Hurricanes in the rain that can take care of that. Obviously, Iron Leaves has that same issue. Thunderous Therian could benefit from the rain hypothetically, and Quagsire, if it's water absorb, could actually definitely be a problem for Rolder. But other than that, I feel like Rain is kind of good into HIM's team. Obviously, the Baxcalibur could be a problem potentially for Rolder, and then of course I think the biggest obstacle that Rolder would have to get over would be if it was like if there was like a water absorbed Quagsire sitting there in front of his Rain team. But yeah, I do kind of give the edge to Rolder on paper on this one. But what do you think about it?
Interesting points. I am going to respectfully disagree and say
All
that I
right,
think this matchup is actually in HYM's favor.
all right,
And I'm sure Raymond's going to agree with this one, but holy moly, Baxcalibur looks insane in this game. Rolder has, and that's the reason why I think it's actually in HYM's favor.
okay,
Rolder has literally no answers to Baxcalibur, and that mon can go absolutely insane in this match. And we'll talk about what actually happened
yes,
in a second, because that's a big factor on that was a big factor in this game.
yeah,
But I do think that, and the reason why I also think this matchup is in HYM's favor is because Galarian Slowking easily comes in on a lot of Roller's Mons and Chilly Reception's out to get rid of the rain and put the snow up. And those, like literally just HYM's first two Pokemon handle a Roller's team really, really well. Now, I do completely agree with you when saying that once the rain is up, and he gets certain threats going, it's tough for HOM because a lot of his defensive mons, like the Garganackle, the Excadrill, they don't appreciate taking strong water moves. And I also thought that on Roller's side, both of his Terra Captains looked quite solid because the Hitmonchan and the Overquill especially, in my opinion, had very, very strong presences in this game.
yep,
Overquill obviously has Swift Swim and gets Liquidation, so that thing could easily break past like all of Glowking, Excadrill, Garganackle, and stuff like that.
yep,
And it even had Terra Grass available to it this game to break past Quagsire if it wanted to. So Overquill, I think, was a pretty big problem for HYM potentially. But yeah, overall, I did think this matchup was in HYM's favor just because of those first two Pokemon. And I have to say, spoiler alert, and I don't say this because it's my mascot. I'm going to sound biased here, but I genuinely also thought that Iron Leaves was really strong offensively into this matchup. So I was a little bit surprised not to see that on HYM side. But
gotcha.
yeah, for those reasons, I do think it was a close matchup, and like you said, I do think this game is very big a very big war of positioning.
Yeah, it kind of comes
And
down
if
to the
Rolder manages
weather.
to,
Yeah, I think it kind of comes down to
yeah,
the weather. Like I see what you're saying definitely. So if it's kind of a situation where like if Rolder can keep the rain up, he's in the driver's seat because he can break past stuff like Slow King and Bax Caliber with stuff like Overquill or even Basculegion will outspeed with the Swift Swim. But if HIM can position himself where he gets the chilly reception to get rid of that rain, then he's in the driver's seat. So I do agree with you there.
exactly. But so yeah, again, I totally think that this matchup is very volatile. It could go either way. But the reason why I think it's in HYM's favor is because Baxcalibur needs no weather up to start wreaking havoc in this game. And due to the
Gotcha.
negative priority of the Slow King on the chili reception, it seemed to me like that would be a little bit easier to do. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it's like I
Fair
said, I
enough.
completely agree with your points.
Fair
So yeah,
enough. So when we take a look at what actually happened in this match, we will see that it was in fact Rolder that did win this game 4-0. Pretty big victory for Rolder actually in this one, and this is kind of what he's been looking for all season because I know Rolder has struggled a little bit in this season to kind of break through. Largely, I will say, due to the fact that he was a replacement coach, actually the first ever replacement coach in BHDL history. So
yep,
that was kind of a little bit of an issue because while he could, draft his rain team at the same time, there obviously if you're a replacement coach, there's a lot of stuff that you can't draft or never had the opportunity to even try to draft. So it is a disadvantage for sure. But he did manage to get that big victory in this one. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a video for this match, so I don't really have too much to say about it. The only thing I can tell from looking at the numbers is it seemed like Hitmonchan put in some solid work in this one. But yeah, I don't know if you know based on the chats or discussions with either of these players any more information because I do not. But yeah, if you do want to fill in any more of the gaps about this one, please go for it.
of course. So the big thing that we cannot forget to mention that we did catch when reading the post chat discussion is that the X factor in this game, the Baxcalibur, did get caught off guard by a Choice Scarf Raging Bolt, dropped the Draco Meteor, and took it out in one shot. And that was
Nice.
clearly from the discussions that we saw the big turning point in this game. It was very well prepped from Rolder. I heard that he did a lot of mocks for this game, and Baxcalibur, as we kind of discussed, was a very big problem for his team. So that's why he decided to bring that, and it worked perfectly. And that's, like we just said, Rolder's team, especially once Baxcalibur is gone, can really start going insane. And it really seemed like he had a game plan from that point onwards. And yeah, it worked out. Hitmonchan did what it was supposed to do, and it seems like the rest of the team, honestly, like I think, yeah, I'm looking at it now. Apart from Pelipper, every single mod on Roller's team got a KO. So big team effort there.
Yep.
But yeah, the Scarf Raging Ball was the big turning point in this game. That's what I got from it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Fair enough. All right. So, moving on from that one, that is going to bring us to the matchup of Emerald Miner and his Demolition Force taking on Abomination and his Athabasca Mill Tanks. So, this is, I want to say there were 2.5 games this week that were pretty important as far as playoff implications, and this was the half of the game. So the last one we just talked about was one of them. This one was the half, and then we're going to talk about the last game late a little bit in a second. That's the other
Yes.
one. Because Emerald was in a pretty solid situation. Abomination was already playoffs locked, so like locked in, so it didn't matter too much for him. Emerald was in a situation where if he won, he was definitely going to be in playoffs. If he lost and lost like by a big margin, then he might have gotten taken out of playoffs, but it was kind of close. But obviously, yeah, on Emerald's side, of course, you see his team consisting of the Greninja and Annihilate and the Metagross, a lot of power, a lot of versatility with the Greninja, a lot of bulk with the Annihilate and the Metagross. The Enamorus obviously provides a lot of speed and power. The Cryogonal is a Terra Captain, very handy utility options there. Moltres is a powerhouse in its own right as well. And then, of course, the Sandy Shocks is a big one, and the Terra Captain Lycan Rock is obviously a big one too. Um, Looking at Abomination's team, he has, as we've all said many times here, probably one of, if not the most solid draft top to bottom this season. The only coach, I believe, to make no transactions, either Pokemon or Terra transactions, this entire season. He was very comfortable with his team from start to finish, and did very well with it, so it shows. But of course,
I
he's
think you
got.
are correct. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I know I'm correct, or I wouldn't have said it. Well, that's
Impressive
not true.
observation, sir.
Well, well, that's not exactly true anyway. But we're just going to pretend it is. So, but
Yes.
yeah, we're going to pretend I never get it wrong, which is not true. But but anyway, so he's got the Great Tusk, which is obviously premier OU powerhouse. Of course, he's got the Dragon Fairy Steel Core with the Clefable Dragonite Heat Ran, very very powerful, and Abomination's team is just bulky offense, which I really appreciate. But he's also got the Terra Captains Jolteon, Vileplume, very well placed, a lot of speed with the Jolteon, and then of course the Reuniclus is a big powerhouse as well. So, when I look at this matchup on paper, I once again I do kind of feel like it's pretty evenly matched. I feel like both these coaches have pretty well-rounded teams. Although I think while Abomination's team I think is more well-rounded on paper, I do feel like head-to-head these teams are relatively even because it's like Greninja can take care of Great Tusk, but then Great Tusk should be able to handle Annihilate and Metagross. But Dragonite seems pretty good against those, but not so good against the Enamorus. Um, so I don't know. I feel like head to head, I feel like these teams are pretty evenly matched. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think this matchup is also pretty even. I do think that when it comes to matchups specifically, Emerald's big hitters in Greninja and Enamorus and also Annihilate to an extent actually match up quite well against Abomination's defensive core. Because if
Yeah,
we take Enamorus, for example, Enamorus can have Moonblast for Great Tusk, Sludge Bomb for Clefable, Moonblast for Dragonite, Earth Power for Heatran. So that, like, his
great
offensive mons
coverage.
do put a lot of pressure. Yeah, they have great coverage and they put a lot of pressure on Abomination's team. But Abomination, I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. In my opinion, Abomination has the best team in the whole league. I'm very, very impressed with his team composition. I do think that there's definitely a few tricky mons for Emerald to deal with. I thought Reuniclus was very strong in this game. I know he loves bringing that mon, but rightfully so. I think he's been really making good use of that thing all throughout the season.
Yeah,
Jolteon was a big thing because obviously it outspeeds Emerald's whole team there. And obviously the electric type stabs covered with whatever Terra type it shows. There's quite a few viable options in this one. We're also very strong. Looking at Emerald's side, obviously Greninja, like we discussed, is very versatile there. However, one thing I did notice about Greninja in this game, and that kind of ties in with what I was saying earlier, Greninja has amazing coverage to hit Abomination's team, but my god, I can already tell that Emerald had massive four move slot syndrome on Greninja in this matchup because there's so
yeah,
many moves that it would want to fit.
yes,
And I have to say, I'm also a little bit surprised by the lack of battle bond usage all throughout the season. He's been Protean on Greninja most games, and I really feel like battle bond this season or this game in particular could have been a very strong checkmate. But I understand why he brought Protean.
yeah,
And we'll obviously talk about the match in a minute. But I also, when I was prepping for Abomination in Week 8, I did notice the same thing he did, which is that Abomination really lacks normal switch-ins. And that's where the Zangoose and on Emerald's team really, really came in clutch. And just like with how I talked about it a little bit with Lazy Boys Flapple, though that game didn't happen. This game did happen, and if there was ever a game in which Emerald was going to bring the Zangoose, it was this one, and he did. So I was very, happy to see that thing get some time in the limelight because he's been using his other two Terra Captains pretty much exclusively throughout the season. But yeah, pretty
yes.
even matchup on paper, but there's definitely a lot of things that can happen,
A
and
lot of
we'll,
factors to
we'll we'll get
consider.
to it now.
Yes,
Yeah, but it was a very exciting match on paper already, in my opinion.
yes, absolutely. So, when we take a look at what actually happened in this game, we will see it was, in fact, Emerald Miner that did win this game 2-0. I thought this was a very good game, actually. Very competitive matchup, very high octane game. Right out of the gate, I do feel like Abomination did make some questionable plays in this game. That's one of the first things that's come to mind here because one of the moments. that stuck out to me was Abomination was in a situation where I believe he had Reuniclus toward the middle of the game in on Zangoose, right? And he opted to switch the Reuniclus out and save it, switching into the Great Tusk. Which then, after Emerald went ahead and popped his Terra Normal on the Zangoose, allowed Zangoose to two-shot the Great Tusk with Facade. So I think that was definitely a tactical error on Abomination's part. I feel like he should have just left the Reuniclus in because in that situation, Emerald could have easily swords danced or something with the
Yes.
Zangoose, and that would have been pretty much game over for Abomination right
That
there.
that's the big thing on why I agree he should have stayed in, because if the Zangoose clicked swords dance there, it was checkmate on the spot.
Yeah, so I think that was definitely an error, and also, but even beyond that, it also allowed the Great Tusk to get two shot where it wouldn't have been like obviously he wouldn't have one shot the Great Tusk with the Zangoose otherwise. So, like even if say he just stays in with the Reuniclus, lets it go down, then Great Tusk comes in and Zangoose is not one shot in Great Tusk without a Swords Dance, you know. So um, so I think that was either no matter what way you look at it, that was definitely a tactical error on Abomination side. And there were, I will say the one thing as a kind of a side note about Abomination is he did I feel like he's a really good player. Drafted a really good team. Obviously, he started off the season hot, and the last couple of weeks, I've said this before, but I think the last couple of weeks he's been slipping just a little bit. He's maybe losing his edge just a little bit. Maybe that's because he knew he was locked in for playoffs, and he was just kind of coasting these last couple of weeks. I don't know, but we haven't quite seen, I think, the edge out of his plays that we saw in the beginning of the season. So perhaps that will change as the playoffs kick off next week. Or this week, I should say. But yeah, that's just kind of an aside. So, but there were just some stuff. There were some things like that during this game that I just noticed that seemed like just kind of tactical errors on his side. But despite that, I thought it was a really solid game. I thought the prep of both coaches was really solid. As you mentioned, the Zangoose really put in work on Emerald's side alongside his Annihilate. Really put some work in. Jolteon did some work for Abomination in this match as well. But I think the real story out of this game has to be the debut of Dancing Emerald. I think that is the real story here. We got to see Emerald Miner bust out the dance moves live on camera for all the world to see, and it was quite the spectacle to behold. I will say, I'm a big fan. I don't dance myself, but Emerald, I gotta say, I'm a big fan of this new persona, the Dancing Emerald persona that was born in this game because that was hilarious. But what did you think about the game, Scorpion?
I thought the best part of this game was the music that Emerald put over anytime Zangoose hit the field. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, the Toxic by Britney Spears combined with the Dancing Emerald. Yeah, that was the best part of the game. You got it, but go on.
Honestly, I will say that was definitely a highlight that sort of made it very, very enjoyable to watch. But
Yep,
rightfully so.
yep,
The Zangoose, like we said, was a very again. I really can't stress enough how much I love Zangoose's role in this game, because it's just the definition of what happens in draft, right? You never see Zangoose in standard play. It's like a ZU mon at this point. But in draft, it just comes together to fight behemoths like Great Tusk and Dragonite, and it puts in work, and that's what I love so much. Um, Obviously, like we said, I do think when Emerald had the Zangoose in on the Reuniclus, I was screaming into the void for him to click Swords Dance, because that, like you said, that would have checkmated Abomination instantly there. But I understand why he didn't, because Reuniclus does hit very, very hard, and he wanted to make a safe play.
yep,
I
absolutely.
did think that the end game in this game was actually really interesting. It was really a sort of a pieces end game, as I like to call it, because basically any time Emerald's Enamorus or Abomination's Jolteon got into position to fire an attack off, they scored a KO. And it was like trying to get your mons in without them taking too much chip. Don't dip into the range of your opponent's attack, and try and wear the opponent down. And I think in that situation, it was actually Emerald's Scarf Annihilate, taking a hit from Jolteon at the end there, that really saved the game. And the Ice Punch to hit the Dragonite with. came in massive clutch there because not only was he able to two-shot it through multi-skill solidly, but it also outsped the Dragonite even at +1 when Abomination went for that Desperation Dragon Dance.
Yeah,
So
he even said in that he said, I know this is on Abomination side. He said, I know it's probably Scarf Annihilate, but if it is, I lose no matter what, which was true. So that's why he did that, which I can't fault him for that because if he doesn't go for that, then he just gets outsped and KO'd by the Enamorous anyway. So,
yeah,
but yeah, he was definitely
absolutely.
a
At that point, you're
lose lose
at that
situation.
point in yep, at that point in the game, your game plan is, or your only hope really is just like hoping he maybe miss EV'd his Annihilate or something, so it doesn't outspeed a +1 Dragonite, something like that.
Yeah.
I will say Emerald also made a few tactical errors this game. Like we said, the SD was one thing on Zangoose, but it was another thing where he had a Metagross in this game, which was very key to surviving some of Abomination's hits early game. And Abomination made a pretty solid prediction, I should add, and caught the Metagross on a Shadow Ball with the switch in
Yes.
and took half of its health immediately. And shortly after, I can't remember what did it, but he also got Metagross burnt as well very quickly soon after.
I think it was
So Metagross, despite having a
it was a flame body burn from a Heat Ran switch, I believe.
oh yes, yes, and that's another Pokemon that on Emerald side that had severe 4 move slots in there because it was not packing Earthquake. So even if it did not get burnt, it was unable to touch the Heatran.
Yeah.
But like I said, it still had defensive merit in this game. So I think going for the heavy slam, risking that burn, and taking all the chip early on was definitely put him on the back foot. He even said it himself.
Yeah, and
And
I feel
it
like
was hilarious to see Emerald thinking, "Oh, I'm going to lose this game. I'm going to lose this game. I think we're out, boys." And then in the end, he ended up winning anyway.
yeah, no, I do agree. I do think in the beginning of the game, Abomination definitely was outplaying Emerald, but then toward the end game,
Yes.
it was Emerald that turned it around with some better plays. So, but yeah, it was funny
Yeah.
that he was thinking he was going to lose the whole game, and then he did end up winning. And yeah,
Indeed. But yeah,
so
very hype game, very well played by both coaches, very well prepped as well. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how both of these do in the playoffs.
definitely. So, but yeah, moving along from that one, that will bring us to the matchup of Pokemaster 88 and the California Trailblazers taking on Brandon P and the Piedmont Triad Kickers. So, this is the battle of the Protean users, both in mascots and on the actual teams, as you guys can see. On Pokemaster's side, of course, he's got the Meowscarada, the Iron Moth, the Skarmory, uh, just solid stuff. Power and utility. Hitmontop feeds to that as well, and the Swampert as well. Obviously, Terra Captain's Hitmontop and then Alolan Raichu are pretty powerful. The Florges is always a threat. Very solid wall. And then, of course, the Hydreigon is a big threat, as they say, too. But on
Yep.
Brandon's
Fret with FRET.
yes, big fret spelled F-R-E-T. I feel you 100%. So then, of course, on Brandon's side, he's got the Urshifu Rapid Strike and the Cinderace, a lot of speed and power there. Terra Captains, Whimsicott and Flygon are very strong. Archaludon, very strong tank. The Thundurus, Incarnate, that is, with the Prankster use alongside the Whimsicott is great utility. Forretress is more great utility. And then the Alolan Muck is a powerhouse too, very tanky. So, looking at this matchup on paper, I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over again for the most part, but honestly, head to head, I do think these teams are relatively evenly matched. I do think Brandon has, well, the teams are probably similarly rounded. I do feel like Brandon might have a little bit of an edge, maybe only for the fact that, Cinderace seems like it has a good time into Meowscarada, into Skarmory. Obviously, is a problem when it comes to Swampert. Um, Potentially Iron Moth, although it does get Zen Headbutt, I think, in this game. Um, but yeah, I guess I'd give a little bit of the edge to Brandon. But I do think this one's pretty close on paper. A lot of strong utility options on both teams. A lot of very uh, wide move pools to deal with. So, but yeah, but what did you think about it?
Yeah, I actually agree with what you said in terms of I do think that matchup is relatively balanced, but I do think the matchup is slightly in Brandon's favor. And the reason why I say that is because there is one Pokemon in particular on Brandon's team that actually stood out to me when looking at this matchup, and that's Alolan Muck. I think
Right.
Alolan Muck, with its typing, is really strong into Meowscarada, strong into Iron Moth, strong into Alolan Raichu, strong into Florges, and strong into Frostlass. That's like half of Chris's team.
Yep.
And not just that, but we'll get to it in a minute. It even had a really, really cool anti-Swampert tech, which is one of the few things that answers it back. So, yeah, I thought Alola Muck was a very big player in this game. And while I'm on the topic of walls, Fortress also seemed quite tough for Chris to deal with because his Ace Meowscarada cannot touch Fortress at all, and neither can Hitmontop, Skarmory, or Swampert. So it seems like in this game, Chris was going to really struggle for to trying to like make progress consistently against Brandon's defensive core, and I think that in the end, like he definitely did bring some cool sets, which we'll get to in a minute, to try and get around it. But yeah, like looking at that, I did think that Brandon had the edge in this one, and also before I forget, the Urshifu Rapid Strike on Brandon's side also looks really threatening offensively, and so does the Cinderace. Like his first two round picks also threaten Chris's team really well, but
Yeah.
Chris of course does have some weapons against it. But yeah, the matchup is in Brandon's favor in my opinion.
Yes, definitely agreed with that. So, when we look at the actual match results here, we will see that it was in fact Brandon that did take the win in this match, 3-0. Um, I will say, right out of the gate, one thing I want to say is that I feel like Brandon definitely prepped for and played this game a bit better than Pokemaster, I think. And one of the big reasons I say that is because that turn one, and you had alluded to it before, but that turn one was crazy. So Pokemaster leads Swampert as he does a lot of the time this season with it, as Brandon led with the Alolan Muck, and out of the blue, unbeknownst to anybody, this Alolan Muck not only outspeeds the Swampert because he's got speed investment in it, but goes for Giga Drain of all things on the
Yep,
Swampert, which knocks it
a
down to
move I did
like,
not even know had it.
yeah, I was just gonna say I didn't even know either Muck got Giga Drain. Haven't looked into it. Who uses a special attack on Muck? Nobody, but now Brandon, I guess. So yeah,
That's the beauty of draft, man.
yes, creative mind at work there. So that was a huge, and I want to say, I think that really flustered Pokemaster from the get go. I think because he was expecting to get like a free sub up with the Swampert, and he could set some maybe hazards, or he could get some free attacks off, that kind of thing. But no, he gets outsped and hit with that Giga Drain. Which after the Giga Drain and the sub, he did have enough HP left for the sub, but he was at like 10 HP after that, and Swampert was functionally dead from that point in the match. So, and I think he did end up letting the Swampert go down not too long after. So losing Swampert that early, I think for basically and getting basically nothing out of it, I think really flustered Pokemaster in the early goings of this matchup, and that combined with the next thing that I want to say, I think led to Pokemaster's downfall. And the next thing I want to say is I guess so. So Brandon has had the short end of the stick when it comes to hacks pretty much all season, right? Brandon has been hacked terribly by most people who've played him this season. But man, did the hacks gods shift in this one and come back on Pokemaster
Honestly, yeah.
because Pokemaster got hacked to hell in this game, specifically in a couple of moments where it really mattered. So he gets it was his Hitmontop got paralyzed, right? And so he gets, I forget if it was what, two or three full paras in a row with Hitmontop, but the one that really mattered was when he hit Brandon hit the Hitmontop with the Cinderace, and Hitmontop actually had counter on deck, which would have been a 100% kill, I think, on the Cinderace,
Yep, 100%.
but he gets full parried and can't do it, and then Cinderace proceeds to run rampant over Pokemaster's team. So that was hard to watch as someone who arguably lost a game because of a hacks as well. It was a little painful for me to see that. I sympathized with Pokemaster after seeing that because I was like, man, he gets hacked against the Cinderace, and the Cinderace proceeds to knock out like over half of his team, and it's just like, wow, that was rough, to watch. But yeah, that was rough. Obviously, the Cinderace went nuts. The Iron Moth, I think, definitely put some work in on Pokemaster's side, but in the end, obviously it was Brandon had the I think the better prep, the better plays, and the hacks on his side on this one. As a little side note, I just want to say um, I have to say, the salt from Pokemaster in his narration was absolutely epic. I loved it. I don't blame him. I don't blame him for being salty. But it was epic, and to steal a page to do, I think perhaps my final reference, or maybe not, to the YouTube icon during this show because you're here, so of course I have to get as many Joey Fontaine references in as possible. To steal a
Insert
line
rolling eyes emoji.
to steal a line from Joey Fontaine, Pokemaster was, and I quote, "saltier than McDonald's fries." End quote.
What?
Your thoughts, Scorpion?
Um, sure. I mean,
How do you follow?
salt is good on fries, but
How do you follow that? No, I more meant like your thoughts on the game, not on the horrible joke. But go ahead.
okay. Yeah, I'm not commenting further on that. Let's see. So I will say, first of all, a massive compliment to both Pokemaster and Brandon. They both brought some really, really sick techs this game. Pokemaster had a blunder policy Raichu with Thunder, which I thought was really, really cool and unique.
Yeah.
We obviously can't forget the special Alolan Muck that we just talked about with the Giga Drain there, and yeah, the counter on the Hitmontop, sad as it was also a really cool tech. Now I'm gonna be honest, I am not 100% sure if that Hitmontop that Chris brought to the game is still in his boxes. He might have released it. I'm not sure, out of rage, but
Probably. And I wouldn't blame him.
yeah,
But go on.
me neither, honestly. But we did see a very interesting moment in this game, and like it may not have neither player commented on it too much, but it made me legitimately laugh. We saw a fortress in this game scaring out an iron moth, and I don't think we're ever going to see that again. But Brandon went hard in on that iron moth with a mon 4 times weak to fire, and actually managed to
Scare it
scare the
out.
iron moth
Yep.
out. Now
That was
I
quite the
imagine
sight.
it's because yep.
Earthquake is a
I
thing.
imagine
Yeah.
it's yeah, I imagine it was because he was either terrified of getting paralyzed or living the fiery dance with Sturdy and then getting an earthquake off.
Yes.
But I just thought it was hilarious to see a fortress scatter an iron moth. That's not something you see every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course, the counter para on Hitmontop that physically hurt me. That was very solid prep from Pokemon that just backfired spectacularly. Well, no, it didn't necessarily backfire, but it definitely was hacks just throwing
Hacks being
salt in the
hacks.
wound on good prep. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, that was very unfortunate. Overall, I did still think it was a pretty solid game. I also really liked the trick sticky barb tech, sorry,
Yes.
on the Meowscarada, which was a pretty solid way to get around the many walls that Brandon had. And unlike me, he actually managed to get his sticky barb tricked away.
Yes.
So that was solid prep. And
Indeed.
yeah, very iconic moment in this game because it was Meowscarada versus Cinderace at the very end there, closing the game out. So that was a pretty epic little moment there for that rivalry. Because I know Chris and Brandon have had a lot of matches in the past, and they were really looking forward to this game. So props to both of them. And I'm happy for Brandon to at least end his season on a positive note, despite the many hacks that you mentioned.
Absolutely. Fair enough. So, moving on, that will bring us to our last game of the week, and that is going to be our other very important playoff implication game, which was the matchup of Cobra and the Two Cool Typhlosions taking on Arcaniner and the West Texas Arcanines. So, looking at this matchup on paper, on Cobra's side, you see he's got that really solid Dragon Fairy Steel Core right out of the gate with the Roaring Moon, Goldengo, Galarian Weezing. He's got those Terra Captains, the Dunsparce, and the Hisuian Typhlosion. Very powerful as well. Of course, the Tentacruel is some great utility on deck. And then, of course, the Iron Hands is quite the powerhouse as well. Very tanky, doesn't want to die. Um, Compare that on RK9ers side, of course, you've got the Latias, the Weavile, the Donphan, the Entei, all just really solid Pokemon. A lot of bulky offense with some speed mixed in there. Of course, he's got the Terra Captains Inteleon and Electros, which are very, very powerful. Lucario and Gengar very strong as well. And then, oh, I guess we do have another Joey Fontaine reference because there's the Wigglytuff at the bottom. But
Oh god damn it.
how many Fontaine references can we fit in one video is the question. Count 'em,
Yeah,
folks.
Scorpion's here, so we got to make the most of it.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, on paper, I do feel like RK9er has the advantage. I do feel like his team is more well-rounded than Cobra's, but additionally, I feel like some of his threats match up pretty well. So I feel like the Weavile has a relatively good time in this one. I think the Donphan could actually have a good time in this match, and also the Inteleon, Terra Inteleon, seems like it could be really strong in this one too. But of course, on Cobra's side, obviously the Roaring Moon seems like it could have a good time. Goldango. I feel like Latias actually has a really bad time in this matchup on RK9er's side, which is strange because it's his first Pokemon. But after you get past the Latias, I feel like the rest of his team has a relatively good time with Cobra's team. But what did you think about it?
I actually thought that I do agree with you. I do think this matchup is in Arceus' favor.
Okay.
I do think that Inteleon is especially strong because it does actually outspeed Cobra's entire team, even the Roaring Moon, by 1 point.
Yes.
So that's a big factor there. And Cobra also doesn't have the best water resist in the world. And obviously, like Tentacruel and Virizion are very vulnerable to. They're literally one snipe shot crit away from just getting overwhelmed,
Yes.
which I imagine probably what happened.
Yes.
And also, I think I don't think it came to this game, but I also like looking at the matchup. I also thought Gengar was quite solid in this matchup as well, just because we always Cobra has infamously struggled with ghost types throughout the season. That's one of the reasons why he later picked up that Hisui and Quillfish.
Yeah.
But that thing has no reliable recovery and is vulnerable to getting worn down.
Right.
So I thought Gengar actually had some pretty solid potential as well. On Cobra's side, I thought that Iron Hands was very solid against a team like Arcaneers. I do think you can build Iron Hands in such a way that it can trade with almost anything. I also thought that Hisui and Typhlosion had some very big potential as well, like a Scarf set with maybe Terra Fairy to deal with Arcaneers' first two Pokemon. I think had some solid potential.
Yeah.
And then I think on the defensive end of things, I think Wheezing Galar also played a pretty big role in this game because it does really well into Weavile and Donphan, which is obviously important threats to cover. But I do think, despite Cobra definitely having some solid tools in this matchup, like I said, I do think Inteleon, especially with that speed tier, is too big of a threat to sort of ignore. And I feel like
Yeah.
that does give Arcanine the edge in this one.
Yep. Definitely fair enough. So, when we take a look at the actual match results here, we will see it was in fact RK9er who won this game 3-0. Unfortunately, there was no video for this game, so I'm not going to have too much to say about it. The only really things I have to say about it, the actual game, looking at the numbers, is it looks like on Cobra's side, the Iron Hands did put some work in. But on the flip side, on RK9er's side, it looked like the Inteleon, as we both kind of mentioned, went absolutely nuts in this one. Took out over half the team on Cobra's side, so it seems like that Terra Inteleon is what took RK9er to victory in this one. And as I mentioned, this was a very important game because due to the fact that HIM lost his matchup, this game was very critical for RK9er. It was a win-in situation for him, and he did manage to get the win and actually secure his first playoff appearance, which we'll get to in a second here in the BHDL. But I don't really have too much else to say about this game since we didn't see it. But did you have any other information about it?
Not too much. I do want to say, I'm happy that Cobra at least stuck the season out. I'm very, very happy they did manage to get this game in. Obviously, a very big congratulations to Arcane because it is also worth mentioning that he not only did he make playoffs for his first time in BHDL history across 4 seasons, but he managed to do so with an insanely tough schedule. I think 6 out of the 7 coaches that are in playoffs are like people that he played against. So
Yes.
very, very impressive showing there, and I'm very happy for him to be in the playoffs. Yeah, like we said, Inteleon went nuts. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I am curious to hear what Terra type it was. I think it could have been either water or electric, perhaps for the Tentacruel. But I do
Yeah,
know that Arcaniner is a very big fan of his stab Terra. So my gut's telling me that this in this game it was Terra
probably Terra
Water, and there was
Water.
probably
Yeah,
yeah, and there was probably some crits involved if I had to guess.
makes
It,
sense.
it did look like Iron Hands fought back quite well. I'm really happy that someone at least drafted Iron Hands this season because a little bit of context, Iron Hands has been infamously neglected in BHDL,
Yes.
but Cobra has been making good use of it, and it definitely seemed like that Pokemon fought back. But probably it was probably a solid game. Inteleon went nuts for sure. But yeah, happy they got this one, and big congratulations to Arcaniner for the win.
Yes, absolutely. And with that, that does close out the regular season of the BHDL4, which means it is now time to take a look at, of course, the final standings of the regular season. And so here we go. You can see those right on the screen there now. These are the final standings. Post week 9, everything updated. So, of course, you can see at the top of the pile, to no one's surprise, of course, we have the former 2 time champion, the Scholar, the Vila, Raymond, leading the way with an 8-1 record. Massive differential as well. Very, very solid showing from him as per the usual. Coming in right behind him, though, of course, functionally we have a three-way tie between 3 coaches with the same 7-2 record. But of course, due to differentials, they are tiered, as you see on the screen there, including the man on the call with me, Scorpion, Biridu, and of course, yours truly, Captain B-Nard, filling those slots out. Obviously, ranging differentials there from good to great, and that solid and 7-2 record. I'll tell you, folks, only in the BHDL can you get a 7-2 record, but it only be good enough for fourth place. But you
Yep.
know that is the competition we have around here.
Can I just say, I never even realized how big the difference is between records. I didn't even realize that fourth was 7-2 and fifth was 5-4.
Yes,
That's only just crossed my mind. But go on.
Yes, I was going to say that. So then we have a little bit of a sizable gap there between fourth and fifth, as we have our next group of coaches, which are the other playoff qualifiers, all with that 5-4 record. So those are going to include Abomination, Emerald Miner, Pokemaster 88, and of course Arcaniner, all with that 5-4 record, varying differentials, of course. But pretty fair and solid dividing line there between those coaches that made the playoffs and those that did not, which is what I like to see personally, because I always hate to see when 2 coaches have the same record and one makes playoffs and one doesn't just because of a differential, which we've seen before many times. But I
Oh,
always
don't talk about it. Cough,
well,
cough, season
I
two.
wasn't I wasn't talking about you specifically, but yes, you specifically were a victim of that as well. But yeah, no, I know it's
Same record as the number one seed, but still no playoffs.
that was a wild season, man. Wild season.
Indeed.
But yeah, no, that has happened many times before as well. So I always like to see when there's like an organic dividing line like that, where you can say, okay, these coaches had better records and they are in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely agree.
So, but yeah, then filtering down from there, of course, we have the rest of our coaches, and we'd of course like to thank all of them for their participation in the league this season, their hard fought games and efforts toward making the season a very very good one, as it were, highly competitive one as well. But yeah, there are your 8 coaches that made it into the BHDL4 playoffs right there on screen. So,
Yep.
um, but yeah,
Should we talk about the matchups?
yes, I was gonna say. So now we have an exclusive on the captain's recap here. We are going to talk about the um, matchups here we're going to see in the playoffs. The first round of the playoffs, of course, is going to be the quarterfinals. And so we did things a little bit differently this season, where the coaches in positions 1, 2, and 3 actually got to choose their opponents out of the coaches in positions 5 through 8. And then, of course, the coach in position 4 was going to be left with the coach from 5 through 8 who was not selected. So,
Yep.
I will now read off, we will now read off, I should say, the decisions that were made by these coaches. So, um,
I
st-
announce it as the league's owner,
sure, yeah, if you want to
or do you want
announce,
to go?
well, I was going to say, if you want to announce the first 2 and then I will announce the second 2, be my guest.
All right. Yeah, sure. So, like we said, of course, the top to bottom coaches get to choose their opponent there, and the decisions have been made. And I'm going to reveal here the first two, and then B-Nard can do the other two. It is as follows. Raymond in the first seed is choosing Pokemaster 88 as his opponent for the quarterfinals. And then in the second seed, myself, Scorpion, is choosing RK9er as his opponent. So for the first two rounds, the Mammoth Swine Doubters will be taking on the California Trailblazers, and my Leaf Agents will be having a rematch with the West Texas Arcanines.
There you have it. Yes. And so that leaves only one decision between two matchups left. And of course, coming in next, obviously, Biridu had a choice to make, and his decision was to, in fact, face Abomination and his Athabasca Miltanks. So that is, of course, by the process of elimination, going to leave me and my Philadelphia Pidgeys to take on Emerald Miner and his Demolition Force. So those other two matches that we're going to see in the quarterfinals, of course, are going to be Biridu and the Atacama Tyrannitars, taking on, of course, Abomination and the Athabasca Miltanks, and then Captain B-Nard, myself, and the Philadelphia Pidgeys taking on Emerald Miner and the Demolition Force, which are both, I believe, new matchups from this season. I don't believe any of those coaches. I know I didn't face Emerald this season. I don't think Biridu faced Abomination, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're correct, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So of these four matchups, I think we only have one rematch from this season thus far, and that is obviously you versus Arcaniner. But the rest of those matchups, I
Correct.
believe, are fresh matchups. So, um, yeah, there you have it. That is going to be uh, your playoffs for BHDL4, and that is pretty much going to be it for this video here. Bit of a long one, but we got through it, and we brought you all the information, all the action on the week 9 of the Battle Hub Draft League Season 4, closing out the regular season. So once again, I do want to say thank you to everyone who participated in this season of the league, whether you made it or not. It's been a great season, I think, and now we are going to be off to playoffs. So
Yep. I would also like to thank all of the coaches and who participated in this season. Thank you very much for your contributions in continuing to make the Battle Hub Draft League such a passionate project, such a competitive draft league here on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It was an absolute pleasure to have all of you. I'd like to think the season has been a very solid success. And yeah, I'm very happy to see how it unfolds. And I'm very, very excited for these playoff matches. It looks like it's stacked roster. And I'm sure we will also get footage from all of them, if I'm not too mistaken. So we'll get to see all these intense playoff matches in their full glory. And of course, my big thank you to Captain B-Nard for hosting these weekly recaps. They have been highly entertaining to watch, and I'm honored to have been a part of this final one. So thank you for having me.
no problem. You got it. Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks for watching again, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. I would, of course, like to thank my guest, Scorpion, for joining me to discuss all the action from Week 9 and, of course, the playoffs as well. So, thank you for that.
No worries. Happy to have been here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, no problem. And coming your way next time, we will see the Philadelphia Pidgeys in the quarterfinals, taking on Emerald Miner and the Demolition Force, as I mentioned. And then, of course, I am going to come back and do at least one more recap. I will be doing a quarterfinals recap next week. I think I'm going to keep doing these so long as I'm not eliminated from the playoffs. So,
Fair,
we'll
fair.
definitely get at least one more, and then if I make it farther than that, we'll continue to get them. But same format for the captain's recaps to come. So, but yeah, that will do it for this one. That's it, and we'll see you next time.